that is enforced by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Under the code, we are committed to giving news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that is not harmful to children, does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. If you think we're not living up to that code, contact the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. For more information, go to www.bccsa.co.za.
It's How To Day on Great Expectations. Learning to read is an incredibly important milestone for our children. In South Africa, with a high illiteracy rate, it's so important to instill an interest in reading from an early age. And if the child is really keen to learn to read early, there are ways to teach them the basics at home. Well, to tell us how to do this, we're joined by literacy expert Jill Eggleton from New Zealand. Jill, welcome to Great Expectations and to South Africa. Now, it's really important to get our children to love books, not just to read, but to love books. How early should we start this process?
Well, first of all, I love that you said love, because that's what it's all about. We do have to have them loving reading and loving books. And we start as soon as actually reading to babies. As soon as that little one can sit on a mum's knee or a dad's knee or grandparent's knee, and you can hold a book and you can show them the pictures or the illustrations. That's the beginnings of it, and that's the beginnings of teaching them about books.
Now, we also know that we do it while we're pregnant. Start reading to your child from the time they're in your tummy. And do you find that makes a difference as well, that is quite effective?
Well, I have no scientific proof of that, but I'm sure that would, because it's showing that a parent has an interest and a love of teaching their children to read. To love books, yeah.
Now, in South Africa, formally, children start to read at about age of 7. If you can give us some idea of New Zealand and where you actually begin doing this?
Children in New Zealand begin school at 5, and so they are formally taught to read at 5 if they are ready. There's a readiness issue, and if they're ready, they'll be taught to read at 5, because preschool has happened 3- and 4-year-olds.
So how would you know? How would you actually measure when a child is ready, or gauge when they're ready?
Well, you can tell because they love books. That's the first thing. I mean, you can see they want to have stories, they want to be read to, and that's a readiness sign.
And trying to find the right book for the right age, how do you begin to decide or determine which book would be correct to read to a child at a certain age?
Well, you know your child and the maturity of the child, but there are certain elements that make books work well to be read out loud. Things like humour, scariness in a book. I mean, I love to read books that make kids a little bit scared. Them in there. Books with strong characters, books with words that are rich language, books that paint pictures, stories that paint pictures in their heads, or words that paint pictures in their heads. Those are elements that we need to look for. Rhyme and rhythm and repetition is also very important. Not only just reading books, but rhymes, reading rhymes and getting children to recite rhymes.
That's fun.
Yes, because there is some research that shows that if a child knows 8 rhymes off by heart by the time they're 4, they'll be among the best readers by the time they're 8.
Oh, yes, for my little one. She knows quite a bit. I'm reading about 6 stories a night.
Well, you're doing wonderfully well. Because I'll tell you some more research in that that children need to have heard 1,000 stories read aloud before they'll become independent readers themselves.
1,000 different stories?
1,000, well, it doesn't necessarily mean different.
Or to be read to 1,000.
Yes, read to. So if a parent or anyone caring for a child read aloud a minimum of 3 stories per night, we would probably wipe out illiteracy in 1 generation.
Wonderful.
So the power of reading to children, because the rhythm of language and the power of words is caught and not taught, and that's really important.
Jill, give us some tips on how to excite your child when it comes to reading, how to get them excited about having this book and these pictures and these words.
Well, first of all, you've got to choose the right book. I mean, if you don't choose the right book, you're not going to excite them, really. It's got to have the right illustrations for young children. For older children, illustrations aren't important because they can paint words in their head, pictures in their heads. But you need to read well. the ups and downs of our voices, how we read with expression. They form, they're attuned to the ears of young children, and so it's reading aloud well. I heard someone say that it's got to be a chocolate kind of experience to children. And I think that's what it's got to be.
So is it just a straight read, or should you, I wouldn't say test, but do you need to ask them questions and do a question and answer session around what you're reading, or just read?
Well, if you ask too many questions, you can turn them off and you can make it boring. There's no room for pain or boredom in reading. But yes, discussion is good. Oral language is the key to everything, really. The oral language, reading and writing flow on a sea of speech, and so you've got to have oral language. So discussing something that's happening in the story, or what the character said or did, or those sort of things, involving the kid.
And feelings. I mean, you bring in a lot of feelings and emotions.
Very much so. That's so important, yeah.
How would a mum at home now get started with her little one, say a toddler?
Just reading to them, making it a regular thing, that every single day, without fail. It's as important as giving them food. Feeding them, you're feeding their soul. Mind when you read to them, and so that's every single day, without fail, without excuse. You must read to them.
Do they need necessarily to be learning the alphabet before they learn about books?
The alphabet is not reading. Reading is meaning. When you read, you gain meaning from text. That's what reading is all about. However, in saying that, it is important that they do know their alphabet, the names of the letters and the sounds of the letters, and that does help them later on. But learning to read is through storing words in their brain. That's how they learn to read. And the alphabet, the knowledge of the alphabet, phonics, is a tool for unlocking words, but it's not about reading. Reading is for meaning,
So if we're talking about phonics, I mean, would you teach a child the letter D, or would you go D?
You would teach them, this is the name of the letter, D, and this is the sound it makes, D.
Oh, so you do both.
So you do both. But you do it in a fun way. Play games with it. You make alphabet raps, and you do I Spy, and you do those things that it's going to be fun. It's not a boring and a tedious task.
And if we're talking about word recognition, like the word the, I mean, it's not the way it looks.
No.
You're saying it a different way. So how would you teach something like that?
Well, I wouldn't. It's not really necessary for parents to do that. Reading to children is the most important thing they can do. But learning words like that is important when they get to school and they're starting to read for themselves, because they're what we call the high frequency words. And so what they need to do is have books that repeat those words over and over again. Resources, and that's what I have written a lot of, those sort of books that repeat those words over and over again, so they see them and they learn to read them in context.
Well, speaking of books that you've written, you've brought some along with you, Jill. If this is the show and tell part of our show, don't you want to just show us what you've brought there?
Oh, well, I just want to show you what I've been showing teachers, perhaps, in South Africa, books that I have written, and they're large books like this, and this is
big pictures.
Big pictures, and this is for children in a classroom, or a teacher in a classroom, actually. But what I'd like to share with the parents out there is that this is the type of book that you would read aloud to children as well, because it has the rhyme and the rhythm and the repetition.
Okay, do you want to show us?
I will show you.
Show us how you'd read that.
Okay, I will. Emu Chick came out of the egg. He saw his mother's wibbly wobbly head, and he chirped, "How very scary! I want another mother." Emu Chick saw Fox, and he chirped, "Here's another mother." "That's not your mother," buzzed the bees. "Not your mother, not your mother," squawked the birds in the trees. But Emu Chick chirped, "Mind your own business."
Wow.
And it goes on like that, repeats that.
So mum can have fun as well.
So
you can try out your different voices.
Mum can hear, doing different voices, characterization. Really getting into that story to make it come alive.
Jill, just to wrap up for us, some top tips to mums out there on how to get started and getting your children to love books and reading.
Find books that you love reading to them, that are going to capture them, capture their interest, that you can read well. That's the first thing. Read every single night without fail, and more than one, maybe three. Three would be great. Rhymes, don't forget rhymes. Teach them rhymes. Teach them to recite rhymes. That's important. And play wonderful little alphabet games
Okay, wonderful advice. I'm very excited. Thank you so much, Jill. And take it from somebody who's read The Gingerbread Man several times in one night. We're back after the break with ideas on how to make you even more of a yummy mummy, how to choose the best colors for your skin tone.